Why, hello, dear viewer. Wikipedia defines a monarchy or monarchical government as follows. A monarchy is a form of government in which a person, the monarch, is head of state until death or abdication. Now, in Hollow Knight we know of one monarch, probably the most important character regarding Hollow Knight's story, aside perhaps the Knight or the Radiance. This figure is known as the Pale King. Today in this little video essay we will take a deeper look at the Pale King, his government over Hallownest, his history of rulership, and the court and kingdom which he helped to establish. Before we do this, let's take a quick look at how the Pale Monarch managed to establish his rule over Hallownest. The Pale King was originally, or is more specific, an ancient worm who travelled through the lands beyond Hallownest. What he searched for is unclear, but perhaps his motives lay in founding a kingdom of his own, as others had done before but failed. As he arrived at the area coined in-game as the Kingdom's Edge, the worm shed his massive body and transformed into a body matching the simpler bugs around him, though he is still often referred to as a worm in regard to his origin. After the king's transformation, he originated a process in which he expanded the minds of his citizens. How this worked exactly is as yet unclear, but powerful magic was probably at play. The simple bugs of the world of Hallownest gained a form of intelligence, not being chained to their desires anymore. Not every race of the kingdom was grateful for the king's arrival. In return for his power, the king wished of total subjection of his subjects under his will, with them praying to him as if he were a god. This is a similar form of symbolism which old absolutistic monarchies of our world had called their own. The monarch was seen as a divine ruler, a link between God above and the subjects down below. In such a sense, a monarch was holy, and the people devoted their simple lives to serving this figure. Now, after establishing his rule, let's set our focus on the king's government. The king, the Pale King, was an absolute ruler. His will was followed by his subjects without a doubt. There was no other official in the government besides the king himself and perhaps the queen, though her role remains elusive. The Pale Monarch established a court at his grand palace, dubbed the White Palace in-game. As Ogrim, a knight under the order of the king, tells the player, the Pale Court was a wondrous place, full of the age's greatest heroes. It seems the palace of the king served as a sort of hub for the world's heroes and travellers. In this form it is similar to a real royal court, as monarchs had their fair share of visitors and powerful people travelling to their domains. The king might have played a significant role in attracting adventurers and others to his kingdom, similar to the Godseekers, a tribe looking for new gods to worship, who came to the kingdom after it fell to ruins. At his court, the king had servants who devoted their service to him and his queen. They are known as the royal retainers, their description being as follows. The most loyal and devout servants of the king. Simple, weak creatures find strength by forming a hive and obeying a ruler. Such creatures become the arms and teeth and claws of their monarch. The retainers focused on doing small jobs for their king. Aside these bugs, it is unclear how the orders of the king were fulfilled in the lands of Hallownest. Perhaps the retainers travelled to the city, as the king mostly lived in the palace, and proclaimed the orders of the king to the citizens of the kingdom. Or maybe the king proclaimed them himself. How active the king was during his rule is unclear, as he was indeed a very reclusive figure. That didn't matter to his citizens though. Regarding the king's popularity, it can be stated that his subjects deified him to a high degree. They built statues and little shrines to pray to their monarch fiercely. They were thankful for his service to them and for the mines which he granted them. It even seems that the king's powers attracted other tribes and creatures to share their services to the king as well. The tribe of Shrooms, living off in the Fungal Waste, acknowledged the king's rule once they've heard of his ability of foresight. The Moth tribe even abandoned their old godden and his radiance for this king. As the kingdom grew, so did its grandeur. Cities and structures were built, trams and stagways constructed, making it easier to travel. Travellers and craftsmen visited the kingdom, possibly even arriving at the Pale Court. Geo was established as a currency, and the people adored their monarch fully. It can be said that this period of the king's rule was a golden age for the kingdom and its citizens. Even after the kingdom's downfall, this reputation of splendour and might attracted many to its ruins. The kingdom, though, also had its fair share of darker shades. The king had no personal army, only knights and guards which protected him and the kingdom from outward attacks. We know 5 of these knights, if there even were more, who had their fair share of battles and adventures just to keep the monarch and their fellow citizens safe. It is unclear whether or not these attacks came from hostile forces, possibly other kingdoms and lands, or if they were simply natural. Howlnest also had its problems with other tribes near it, especially with the Bugs of Deepness, though they may have attained a form of neutrality regarding each other later on. The society of the kingdom seems to have been split off into different ranks and classes. Higher ups lived in the eastern part of the City of Tears. Personally, since its name might have been different, I prefer the term Pale City, but that's just subjective. The city was home to rich individuals, aristocrats, so to speak. They were a prominent pillar of the monarchy's stability, though this might have led to class conflict. It is unknown whether the citizens of Howlnest ever desired to abolish the king's rule, or if they ever acted up politically by rebelling. It seems though that such sentiment wasn't widespread, as the Pale Monarch was very popular among his people, and his power over his kingdom was absolute. The king also had an important relationship with another character named the White Lady. She ruled the kingdom alongside her husband, though the monarch was more powerful in this relationship, it seems. Her duties might have been to produce an heir for the king, though perhaps this was not necessary as the king lived eternally. Her specific role is as yet unclear. She helped the king with his plan to fend off the infection, which will be explained later on, and we know that she is indeed a higher being, as was the Pale King. The queen retreated into her gardens at times, which may have originally caused conflict with the Mossbag tribe. It is unclear whether the queen was a popular figure among the common people of Howlnest. Her husband's reputation and power far exceeded her, but it seems to not have mattered. Unlike the king, there are no grand statues or shrines remembering the queen or honouring her. Finally, we come to an end of the king's rule. The infection caused by the old god of the Moth tribe was something which neither the king nor his knights could counter, and it slowly took hold of the lands of Howlnest. The king devised a scheme to contain the infection inside a hollow vessel, which would be known as the Hollow Knight. In short, this plan failed, many vessels were constructed and killed, and the infection spread onwards. As defeat seemed to manifest itself, the king and his palace disappeared. Similar to the French king's flight during the French Revolution, this damaged the monarch's reputation among his citizens immensely, and everyone stood aghast, wondering why their king would abandon them in this hour of hardship. This can be seen when reading some of the dialogue when dream nailing the royal retainers' corpses in certain locations. They read, "Return to us. Missing monarch, we need you now. Where have you gone, dear king?" Other followers remained hopeful for their monarch's return, but in the end, he never came back. The king retreated into his palace. It can be found in-game when dream nailing a king's mold corpse outside the palace ruins. It is still unclear if this is a memory or the actual palace, though many fans seem to suggest the latter. As one makes its way through the palace grounds, the player can see the grandeur of the place and the royal retainers still roaming around. As a means of protection, the king left back his guards and traps, retreating further into the palace's core. After completing the course, the player can find the corpse of the Pale King sitting on a throne. The exact reason for his death is unknown, but it seems the king was still determined at his last fleeting moments. His dreamnail dialogue reads, "No cost too great." This seems to have been the king's motto for his reign and his government. He seemed to indeed have cared for his kingdom and its citizens, and while we can only speculate of his feelings at the time of its downfall, it seems he was heartbroken and completely distraught emotionally. The question if the Pale King was indeed a good monarch is hard to answer. His government brought many benefits to the lands of Howlnest, and had his rule ended during the kingdom's prime, then one might say yes. His later actions and plans, though, shed a darker light on his rule, especially his disregard for the lives of the vessels, and his flight also damaged his historic reputation a lot. In the end, one must decide for themselves the legacy of the Pale Monarch, but it can be said that it left an everlasting mark on the lands of Howlnest and its history. Now, if you want to know more on the history of Howlnest, and perhaps of the lore of Hollow Knight, in general, please watch Mossbag's newest video, the mostly complete lore of Hollow Knight. I will leave a link down in the description below. Speak soon.